it's really tricky. I now know that there was once upon a time a sitcom called Rick and Morty, and I now know about Bunnicula.
Mhm.
I don't know enough physics, obviously. I
Wow.
do know the Challenger. I was kind of curious about what her ethnic background was. Did
Mexican
anybody-
and Jewish. Mexican
It's what?
mother,
Jewish.
Mexican mother, Jewish father.
Okay.
There were a lot of Jewish references.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I kept wondering about the wrestling. Jacob wrestling with the angel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what wrestling means to me.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
And wasn't that in there? And there was a poem that had that, right? Or am I remembering it from the other book?
well, she wrestles with just about everything.
Yeah, but I thought there was actually, but I could be remembering a poem from the previous book.
No, you could be remembering it. And like I said, I've only read through it once.
Yeah, it's a it's fairly dense, right? I mean, to try to remember every little moment in this book, because it's pretty dense.
Yeah, it made me feel that I was too.
Boy, it was definitely a difficult read.
Except it's so obvious when you look at the table of contents, it's so obvious that there's a structure. And I kept thinking, if I caught her references, I think I'd get it. And I think it's probably not that tricky if you recognized all the references.
Well,
Anybody know any
you'd have to
physics?
be like a, I don't know, a physicist and a space scientist, and I mean, that's some pretty heavy references. You'd have to be, I mean, this is an intelligent book. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge in this. An intelligent book, a lot of intelligent book, a lot of
Uh-oh,
What is that?
I think that's KB.
Maybe you were on there twice.
No.
How do we get that off?
It fits though.
Yeah, it does. I was gonna
That
say
does.
it's like it's a multiverse.
It's a multiverse.
Oh, well.
What do we like? I don't know what to do about that.
KB will figure out. Did you say she was on twice?
Yeah, she has two screens.
Okay, she's in echoing mode or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And is
Yeah.
there an echo for you guys now?
No.
No.
You're good.
Sorry, Zoom has not been friendly to me the last few times. I'm about to be tired of Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom was weird to me trying to get on. It wouldn't cooperate either. So I don't know. Maybe something going on with that.
But we just flowed with it here, KB, because it was a multiverse, and it seemed to fit what the book talks about too. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna close myself out and be zero.
Nullification.
Nullification. We nullified
nullify.
KB's
We're gonna
previous
nullify you.
entry in.
Yeah. Well, what do we think about the cover? Y'all
The
like-
cover's beautiful.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think it definitely fits.
Yeah. It looks chaotic to me.
It's string theory.
Okay.
For me, it kind of fits the way the poems were structured because they're structured with that kind of very choppy structure to them.
Yeah.
So you're kind of expecting to see here and there in the poems from the very moment you see the cover.
Yeah. Fragmented language.
Yeah, the kind of visual space on the page,
Mhm.
and the way in which the cover of the book's arrangement of the words, that kind of syntactical arrangement of them on that page, kind of predicts in some way what we're going to encounter.
Thank you for saying it much better than I did.
Oh,
You said it just fine.
yeah.
We may be entering a new era in physics, an era where there are weird features in the universe that we cannot explain, an era where we have hints that we live in a multiverse that lies frustratingly beyond our reach. That's what she says before she starts the first one, poet wrestling with the possibility she's living in a simulation, which is before we even get to section 1
Right.
and the wrestling. Oh, the little epigraph before 1 is anybody there? From something called Paper House 188. I don't know who Harry Cliff was, and I don't know what Paper House was. So, you know, anybody that's run these, let me know. Then we've got somebody called Ku-un starting section 2. Somebody's coming from the other world.
That's this poet.
Name.
That's a Korean poet.
Aha.
Ko-un.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Flowers of
Flowers of a Moment. That's one of his books. The Three-Way Tavern. He's he's one of the kind of Nobel possibilities, I think. But he's a Korean poet. I don't know. I mean, he's got a ton of books. I've got 4 or 5 of them, I guess. Those are just right here real quickly to grab hold of. But you know, Alice, the epigraph that you read at the very beginning by Harry Cliff, you know, that idea of the multi, live in a multiverse that lies frustratingly beyond our reach, which is in many ways, a poet might gravitate, no pun intended, might gravitate toward that type of language anyway, because writing poems is a exercise in trying to understand existence or find language that is always outside of the reach of, even the best poem that you're like, okay, finally I got this down. It's never really completely adequate,
well, at the very end, she's got poet wrestling with reverse
Yeah.
string theory, which reminded me of the cover a whole lot.
Yeah.
And those little plays on words like reverse and then reverse. I mean, we're talking about poetry, so we're talking about verse, little moments like that I enjoyed.
Yeah, there's quite a few little humorous moments in the book that just kind of surprise you. Jump in there like, oh, that's kind of cute. And a little surprising rhyme too. I mean, I thought the vampire bunnies that were kept showing up was like, okay. Vampire bunny.
Isn't that based on is it a children's series, children's books?
It was first children's books, and then it apparently became an animation series that I totally missed.
Was that
Oh.
Benicula? Benicula? Was that what that was?
Yep,
Funicula.
he had once been a pet of Count Dracula, and he had fangs, and he sucked the juice of vegetables. And depending on what vegetable he sucked, he'd get a different superpower.
Oh, wow. Well, he makes a showing in multiple poems.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things I love about, I mean, I forget how many books we've now done, 13, 14 or so. I always like to look at the first stanza, the first line of a book. I don't know how, I mean, it seems always important. I mean, I obsess about this stuff myself when I'm trying to put together my own books, but what's the first line? What's the first thing that a reader will encounter? And
Yeah.
I loved the beginning of this book's
All my timelines lead
to this
poem.
poem. I just stopped reading for a moment after that. And just kind of sat there and went, oh, this is such a really great line to begin a book with.
Mhm.
I mean, I had already read the previous epigraph, so the idea of multiverse and all of that. I don't know. It's like, okay, great opening line here.
Yeah. And then on the third line. So I have some
Got
questions.
some questions. Yeah.
Which is all about discovery, right? She's discovering
Mhm.
throughout this entire book a new way to, I don't know, encapsulate language and also emotion and the meaning of what does it mean to be alive and living and human and loss and grief.
Mhm. Well, and and even that second line, proof, which you think, okay, that's gonna okay. You write basically two sentences at all times. One is an assertion, a claim that you make, and the other one is evidence. Almost every sentence falls into one of those categories. So I read the first one. All my timelines lead to this point. Oh yeah, proof. Okay, and I'm thinking, okay, here's the proof of it. But it's pretty quickly. Oh wait a minute. Does she mean proof like in math, like geometry? When you have a
Right.
proof,
Indeed.
or is she trying both of those kinds of meanings? Okay, well, this is the first two lines in this book. If I'm gonna have to do this much thinking about the first two lines, it's gonna take me a long time to get through this book. But of course, I love stuff like that. So
Well, what's the shallow wood? That was another thing where I felt it was an illusion, and I couldn't remember in the back of my head that very beginning of what brought us here is all the same horse. What flipped in my brain was the horse that came in on.
mhm.
I don't know where that came from either. And I didn't understand the shallow wood.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have an answer to that.
I don't know.
I do think, well, right there from the beginning with that fourth line, well, really even on the third line with the, beginning, so I have some questions. I mean, so, I don't want to get all grammar nerdy here, but, so is a coordinating conjunction. It's not a transitional word. And so all of a sudden we have sentence structure that's a little different, well, even with proof and a colon, and then what follows. It's not the regular or expected structure of a sentence. And then by that fourth line, we get this which, relative clause essentially, but it's standing by itself. It's a fragment. which
And
of
it's
us,
coming after she said some questions, but there's no question mark.
there's no question mark. You might expect it to be a question and it's not, so it must be a relative clause. And then that next, what if blood is emptiness? That's, I mean, it sounds like a question, but it doesn't have a question mark either. And then there are places, especially in the first handful of poems. Well, actually, there are other places in the book, but there are periods in places where you don't expect. I mean, you can read through those periods if you wanted to,
Mhm.
but then you have to ask yourself, why are these periods here? And there's this parceling out of 2 words or 7 words or and a period, but it's in a place where really what follows, the next few words actually go with the previous sentence. And so what's the reasoning for that? I mean, I have some questions too. So I have some questions.
For me, the way she has the proof is like, here's the proof. What brought us here is all the same horse. And then she's making kind of a series of suppositions. If this, then this, then this, then this. So that's like the logic that rules the world to her.
Okay.
Kind of like doing a logic problem, you know, one of those ones that has the grid and you have to kind of, well, if this one is this, then that one has to be missing, you know, the murder weapon in Clue or whatever.
A kind of syllogism or syllogistic kind of approach.
I think there's something beneath all that too, though, beneath all the, you know, the punctuation, the lines, because there's something that connects this poem to the poem, If This Is the Age We in Discovery, on page 35. And it's almost like there is some kind of, I don't know if it's an illness or a condition or something that's where she talks about veins and being hard to stick, and her veins are flighty and hard to find, drink more water. And the same thing in the If This Is the Age We in Discovery, hospital beds and the nurses unknowing, they stroke, she's gone out again. You know, there's some kind of illness or something going on here. My veins are narrow, closed, won't let them drink, and I'm punctured so many times I pass out. I don't know what the connection is, and I don't think it's ever explained really, and I didn't read anything in any interviews that explain that, but there's something interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I don't typically look up anything on the books that we, you know, read. Well, a lot of times they're fairly new, and so there's not a review or
As far as interviews and stuff.
yeah, or interviews or anything like that. But yeah, I think I'm like what some of us are saying here. This seemed a little bit more of a challenging read than I think some of the stuff we've been exposed to. And I did find myself reading, and there may be other things. I just read one review of this, and it was in Entropy magazine. And I'm gonna drop that in the chat if that's okay. And I found it to be fairly enlightening. I don't, not that I remember everything from it, but yeah, at the time I read it, I thought, okay, this maybe kind of helps to organize a little of this in my mind. Because this is not a book that, you know, 1 or 2 reading. Of course, as you know, I keep saying, hey, we're not supposed to be like a graduate, you know, creative writing workshop here. I mean, we're just a book club reading books, and you know, we're not writing essays for anything that follows. But you know, there's a lot to kind of settle into and think about in this book, and it's okay to have a little help.
Well, I think if you can find the help in the poet's own voice, where she's answering like an interview question or something like that, to me, it helps with the
Yeah.
understanding of her intentions and purpose in writing these poems. I find it super helpful.
Well, I didn't even, I think she's available somewhere online on YouTube, probably reading, and I didn't even do that because I just didn't want to. I mean, a lot of times I'd like that. I like having the author's voice in my head when I'm reading the poems, but I didn't do that this time with this book. And maybe that would have added something to my reading.
I'm super curious to know how she knows so much about science and math, and if she has a degree in physics or something.
I do love a lot of the, they're kind of wonderful lines spread out through the book that kind of grab your attention. The first one, as I mentioned, but even in that first poem, on page 2, right after the little asterisk, maybe our most real timeline resides in another verb tense. It's an aphoristic kind of statement. And then on the next page over, almost directly across on page 3, it's too bad that all our timelines are inherently self-destructive. But I found lines like that throughout the book that I put my little yellow Post-it notes next to.
What did you think about the symbols and the parentheses? Was that distracting to y'all, or?
And the double colons as well.
Double colons, which in math means to find the mean, the average,
Okay.
right?
I don't even know what that means. Even if I knew that double colons meant that, you
Average,
defining
yeah.
that doesn't tell me anything.
I know, because if you were to say that, I'm trying to find a poem.
In a weird way, I was thinking it was like analogies, like.
Well,
where
but
you've
it's
got
like blended
like
and finding the middle, finding the middle.
And so what do the cursive brackets mean in math? So this is a math book, really. This explains a lot about why I was having
Math and
difficulty.
science. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the way some of those double colons are in their own sense bracketing a phrase, it doesn't read like you would be, finding the mean or the average, or I mean, like on page 17 in the middle of poet wrestling with an ode to her brother. There's that double colon. Now you ask if anyone double colon sees you. And the same thing with and prayer.
Are you on page 15, did you say?
17.
17.
Oh.
17.
Well, the first part of that too, I mean, did I miss the conversation where we're using X's instead of other letters?
That's a carryover from her other book.
Mhm.
And what did it mean in that book?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I found it difficult to know what to do with those. With the double colons and the cursive or the italics parentheses, other than they're setting apart something.
Yeah, when Jeff picked out those 2 lines on page 2 and 3, I'll have to be honest, I did not even see those lines because I was so distracted by everything else.
Yeah.
the cursive brackets, the around words that I didn't understand why it was like that. And so it took me away from the actual lines that were really lines that I would expect to find in poems.
Yeah, we picked this book to challenge you, KB.
Well, it did.
Challenge me too.
I mean, I want to feel like I'm invited into reading what somebody's thinking or invited into their life. And I didn't feel like that with this book. I felt like we were supposed to be wrestling with
Yeah, we were.
with this. And, I don't know. There's wrestling and then there's complete not understanding. And I really didn't know what to do with the X's instead of whatever other letters were missing, and the brackets and the colons and the period after every word. And so that I had a really hard time with this.
Yeah. I think she's creating a mystery, and it's almost like there's the closer you get to understanding the mystery of science and math in some ways, and the universe, the more there is to understand, right? The more we know, the more we realize there's still more to know. And you
Right.
can kind of apply that to ourselves and humanity. The more we know and understand humanity and we understand ourselves, the more we realize there's still a lot left to know. I think this book continues to, with wrestling and trying to discover and trying to be curious, and we're just learning that there's still so much left to know. An endless.
For me, everything in the book was on 3 different levels at least. The X's I read eventually as the sound I.
Yeah.
And then I thought also how in the Jewish tradition, you don't spell out God. So was she putting the X's in for a symbol for God too? Because you didn't write the word of God. Those were 2 things that crossed my mind. I don't know if they're right or not, but
Yeah.
Well, one thing I'm thinking about is just the word subatomic, maybe. And those periods after, kind of breaking up a sentence as it would normally appear, but in portions, and then putting a sentence or putting a period and then another period. So that we maybe take the whole that we would normally be conditioned to expect and to read as one unit, and then it's parceled up into smaller units, which is kind of like math in a way. I mean, you kind of, hey, I've got a ruler, I'm going to come down to the 12 inches, and I take the inches and I take them and do them smaller, and it could be something like that, perhaps. I mean, that's at least one way to rationalize. And then also I'm thinking in terms of the use of colons. Anytime I see a poet using colons, my first thought is to go to A.R. Ammons, Archie Ammons, if you're familiar with his, who was also had a kind of science and math kind of mindset. And then he uses colons very often instead of periods. I mean, it's almost everything is just strung along. You keep adding and adding and adding. And then what's the book? I think there's maybe more than one book by Alice Notley. Do y'all know that poet? Notley, Alice Notley. Is it In the Pines, or I'd have to get up and go around somewhere. But I know there's one of her books where I can't remember if it's colons or every line or parts of lines are actually in quotation marks. And then you'll read another part and they're in quotation marks. but it's kind of like this book in terms of it'll be a phrase. Well, but everything is in quotation marks throughout almost the entirety of the book. And so as you read it, at first you're kind of thrown off, or I was, and then I just began to read it as if the quotation marks weren't there. And the way, and sometimes I might read A.R. Ammons as if the colons aren't there. I don't know exactly what the motive is and or the logic that a poet will use for those types of things, but any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I guess I just think, again, if we have to read without pretending they're not there,
Mhm.
then why are they there? Because like,
Why are they
when you
there?
were saying that about the periods, I was talking to somebody about that and I was like, it was totally, I mean, I was getting a headache from stopping at every period. And then I thought, okay, throw away the period and read it like it's a sentence. I was like, oh, wait, okay, I get it. I understand it. And then I thought, so why would you want to stop after every word? I'm trying to find the poem that particular one was in, and I was just like, but if I have to throw it out in order to understand what's being said, then why is it? I mean, there's got to be a reason it's there.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering the same thing. And I felt that if you took away the periods, it just read like prose to me. It wasn't so much poetry, and maybe that's why she had to break it so much. I don't know, I'm guessing. And the poem, All I Wanted Was Everything, on page 57. I love that poem, first of all, because it's not fractured. She uses line breaks successfully, I thought. And so I was very much taken in by the form. It's page 57.
Yes, I like that one too.
Well, but I wondered whether it was because I actually knew who Archimedes was and how he died. Yeah, where in most of them, I actually didn't get her references. And that was,
You didn't get Bob Ross?
I didn't get
You
Bob
got-
Ross.
No,
What?
A happy little.
Okay, let's take a vote whether Alice can continue in this group. Okay.
Absolutely, she can.
You know, if she says Challenger, you know what that is.
Mhm.
She really is playing around with a lot of things. And I think she's making metaphors that I'm just not getting because they weren't part of my
Cultural.
mental structure. Yeah, like Benicula. Like
Well,
rape.
you know, that was not anything that I knew about either, but you know, like I say to my own students, well, I don't know, ask Google. So, you know, I went to Google like anybody would. And but once I got that reference, I thought, oh, okay, well, I've missed this. This is kind of interesting. And so then I went back and reread the poems, or the first one where I encountered it. But you know, there are other things too. I was the Bob Ross poem I thought was, you know, a really nice one. But the one that I liked as well was fairly early in the book on page 15, Poet Wrestling with an Ode to Her Brother.
Yes.
And of course, I'm a big fan of the Cranberries, and I knew this was okay. There's a song called "Ode to My Family," and if you're familiar with that song, even some of the lyrics of that song seem to factor into this poem. Helga, you know that that reference as well?
No, I was laughing because I didn't know the Cranberries was a musical group.
Oh,
I
okay.
just thought Cranberries.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Cranberries.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well,
What did you like about that poem, Jeff?
well, just on one level, I like the idea of, well, actually, I mean, as we've been talking, and as Alice was talking, I was thinking about, I mean, on one level, we want to write a poem or a book of poems that is accessible and, maybe has a wide audience. But at the same time, in doing that, sometimes there are aspects of knowledge or aspects of our experiences or anybody's experiences that would then go overlooked because they don't. I mean, yeah, maybe not everybody now is going to know who the Cranberries are, but the Cranberries are a very important band. I mean, the voice of that lead singer, Dolores, was just incredible. And so why shouldn't that be part of poetry? Have I read any poems where the Cranberries have factored in? I don't remember. I mean, maybe somebody's written about that, but of course, why not? Why haven't I already done it? I mean, of course, this makes sense to me that somebody would bring in, and especially if you're trying to write something about a member of your own family, and then they have this song called "Ode to My Family." I thought it was a really kind of interesting way of getting at that. So she says, "I never made it through a single night." That was the first line in that poem. It wasn't without design. The bright, I guess that's bright, bright eyes. So in a way that does kind of teach you to take the letter I and replace it with X.
And
And then
E.
once you go, okay, what does that mean? So then the word I or the self maybe is a mathematical equation too that we're solving for X. So I mean, I have little thoughts like that as I'm reading a poem like this one. Where's it? A little bit farther, she says, there's something in this poem that was a little echo. Oh yeah, on page 17. So we talked about this. Sandy, you said right in the middle of the page, you got the 2 colons, and then you've got, now you ask if anyone, and then it sees you, does anyone care? I mean, does anyone care? That's a lyric out of the song "Ode to My Family." And so there's little echoes like that I thought were really kind of wonderful. But that's just par for the course anytime you have allusions, right? Some of the allusions are inclusive and some of them are exclusive. They exclude readers if they don't know what the references are.
Yeah, and I think we should expect to find references we don't know in some cases. I think, again, it's like, I mean, I liked that particular poem too, The Poet Wrestling with an Ode to Her Brother. I like that one too. But I think and I mean, the brackets in this one seemed to be like actual parenthetical thoughts. And so they made sense to me in this particular way, but there are other poems where they just seem to be random. They don't seem to be. And that's why in other poems I was having difficulty because I couldn't see a pattern to it. If I could figure out a pattern for what it stood for, and I just wasn't not smart enough. I just wasn't able to see that, what it was. And so I felt excluded, not illusionally, but because I didn't get, the way the way it was set up, like the Bob Ross I was thinking that the B and the BR, whatever, did she say BR? I think it was BR. But it was said after Bob Ross. And so I was just assuming that the B and the BR was Bob Ross, but I think it's the very next poem or one
Right.
not too far right there. There's another B or BR or whatever. And I thought, oh, wait, this is somebody else. And then I thought, okay, now I feel like it's a private poem instead of a poem, you know, that's saying, hey, be part of this story with me. So yeah. I mean, I loved the title poem. I thought that was really good. And I wish that she had included, you know, with all the Poet Wrestling poems that are in here, I wish the one that was put on the September 11th memorial was included, because, you know, her poem was Poet Wrestling with Angels in the Dark is on the September 11th memorial. And I'm just like, you know, but that I feel like I felt included in that because I knew what the story was for that. Whereas some of these, I don't know, like Alice was saying, I don't know. And it's not the reference per se, but it's like the setting or the lack of setting or the background or the lack of background. And I'm thinking, how do I step into this? I mean, it would have been easier to step into it if it looked like the poem on page 27 or page 25. But
Well, the
trying,
one on 13 too.
yeah, but trying to
It's
step
very
into it
different.
when it looks like, you know, page 82 and 83 is a lot more difficult for me. So that's, you know.
You know, those kinds of choices, we might could think of them as strategies for discovery. I mean, we have a kind of expectation of what we think a poem looks like on the page or operates visually on the page. And I think poets are always trying to figure out and innovate, find some other, you know, I think about, you know, someone like W.S. Merwin, if you're familiar with his body of work, at least, you know, in the early days, his poems are fairly straightforward on the page, maybe even metrical at times. But, you know, he kind of makes a conscious decision at some point to begin writing poems without punctuation. Maybe the 70s, I think, when he starts that. And, you know, by the time you get into latter books, especially like The Vixen, maybe the mid 90s or so, or Travels in the early 90s, those books don't have punctuation. And if you're used to reading poems that are punctuated, they do throw you for a loop for a little bit until you find the rhythm of it. You find it's almost like if the poems can teach you how to read them. Sometimes that's a little easier process than others. But does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the discovery. You're discovering something.
Yeah.
Reading. So I found this little quote by the poet. I think this is interesting. She says, I am fascinated by multiverses, simulations, and theoretical particles that continue to go unproven. And poetry allows me to explore these ideas through, say, strange syntax and spacing on a page. Poetry is a large step in shape-shifting the languages that shape our understanding of each other, our world, and the universe. For me, discovery is not about possessing or taking, it's about curiosity itself. Shape-shifting the languages. She's shape-shifting what our expectations, you know, by presenting these poems in such a interesting and challenging way.
Well, you know, go back to the poet wrestling with happy little clouds. I mean, we got to spend some time with Bob Ross. Come on, people.
What page is that?
That's on page 20.
20.
But let's take to say the first 6 lines or so. And the first line says, we tried to make our cities last a while. So there's the idea of time, which is throughout the book anyway. By beating the devil from our brushes. Well, wait a minute. Why is that? Why not just not have a period and continue that, right? Like we tried to make our cities last a while by beating the devil from our brushes. But even the way it's on the page now, I have to accept it. That's the way the poet wrote it. And so I have that first statement by itself. And then it's like an accretion of meaning by beating the devil from our brushes and highways. And then you get B, which I'm like you, KB. I thought that's Bob Ross. So, but I like these out there by himself at the end of the line. Like B creates programs and code, assuming that it's Bob Ross, and it may not actually be. And then this line, the kind that makes strangers see. Well, that's interesting. The little distant trees as. Now that'll stop you, right? I mean, well, that's a little, why is that word as in this parentheses, which looks mathematical? I was trying to remember some of that stuff. It's been so many years ago, but it seems like that, is this calculus or something? And then the little distant trees as living. So is that the kind of program or code that makes strangers see the little distant trees as living? Well, I like that idea, but that's not necessarily what was said. It's just piecemeal. And then, but I like that it's living just by itself. It's one word. And then far back in the distance. It's like every little piece of meaning is slowed down. B tries to make things. Okay, like a painting? Like, okay. And then B tries to make things better. B tries to make things better. He tries to fix. He tries to realize other people's intentions. For a moment, I've got to think about, is he trying to realize other people's intentions or help them realize intentions? When I was with him, wait a minute, that's an introductory subordinate clause. Why don't you just put a comma? But when I was with him, I felt I could make a city. And that throws me back into Bob Ross. I mean, he teaches painting, or he does all those kind of painting things, but it makes people feel like they could actually do this.
Jeff, the thing about the way she's punctuated it, like the second strophe, creates programs and code, the kind that makes strangers.
Yeah, as a line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on the next line, see, the little distant trees as living far back in the distance. And she does that a lot, where what she ends the line on and the pause that you'd normally take at the line break gives you one meaning. And then you could take the beginning of the next line, either with what was at the, as an end jam thing, or you could take it differently with the line it's on, and it's something else again.
Well, that's multiverse.
Oh, is that what that is? It's interesting. It shifts the meaning often. Like two sides of a coin almost.
The whole way through, her work reminds me of another Cranberries song. In Dreams, there's the line, "It's never quite as it seems." And the whole way through this, it's so many different meanings depending on how you read that punctuation.
Mhm.
In her book with all the wrestling, in the Bible story, it was wrestling with God. Is she trying to find that there's God out there the whole way through the book?
Well, on page 27, toward the middle of that poem, the songs we know not to talk over. And about, I don't know, 10 or so lines down, 10, 11, she says, but how often have I asked the sky what comes after death? And then two birds pass over my head. I thought those lines were, well, yeah, I mean, there's the curiosity, there's the desire to discover, there's the universe, the multiverse, the string theory, there's all this that's available to us in terms of knowledge, but what comes after death? That's maybe the biggest question. And then almost anything then becomes an answer, even two birds passing over, I mean, we're probably all like, have you ever seen the movie Bruce Almighty? You know that movie? Like he's like, I just need a sign, and then this truck pulls out in front of him on the road and it's got all these signs on it. And he's like, yeah, he's honking the horn and goes around it. I mean, even if we ask for a sign, whatever one we're given, we're like, that's not it. But in the Bible story, in it, Jacob wrestled an angel. I'm not gonna let go till you bless me or whatever. That's what I think that Alice, you were talking about that word wrestling has that connotation, or that biblical echo.
And he was forever after Lane.
Yeah.
And she has some kind of infirmity that runs through all of this with there's a reference to the girl who had polio. There are the times when she's getting infusions and her veins are slippery and run away. She needs the smallest needle. That comes up in several poems.
Mhm.
Oh. There's a beautiful one. Oh. The songs we know not to talk over is just amazing. Where we get to the point where she's saying, oh, I have no ion infrared evidence, no delicate microphones to catch when I check the closets and drains during a thunderstorm. When I've said sitting at a deathbed, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I told them not to pull the plug, even if my body says when. Bury me standing, bury me 3 times. No one really drops dead from seeing your gauntleting shape in the mirror. Not mirror, but grace. Forgive me for covering my eyes, for cowering under the blanket, for swatting at you when I passed the flower garden, when I shut my windows and chased you from park benches and fruit trees. I didn't know there are people I'm not willing to ever let go. And I won't. I haven't. And you know that she's done this amazing switch in that poem of going from things like, well, she starts with the funeral,
Mhm.
and then we've got the katydid limbs like a praying mantis, capable of anything but beginning. Oh, and then she shifts to that bird, and the bird becomes kind of an omen. But that's where I think she starts with the idea of haunting. Oh, that how often have I asked this guy what comes after death? And then two birds pass over my head. I couldn't tell you why I awaken at times to a pecking at my eyes. I don't know why some birds return to haunt us. And that, you know, it's a funeral. There's this wind thing going on. It's I don't understand quite how she's doing it, but she's doing it in a way that equates things in a very complex way. I'm rambling, guys. I'm
Well,
sorry.
Alice, the two lines in that poem that you don't necessarily touch on, but right before the birds and that, you know, asking what comes after death, she says, you know, walk away first. You won't see it again because now it's a bird.
Mhm.
Not very scientific, but I have seen this. Not the transformation, but how often I have asked the sky. And then a little bit later, she gets down, she says, the only promises I've kept are those scientifically proven. So there's this, I don't know, it seems as though maybe a kind of dialectic set up between the scientifically proven and then the things that somehow exist outside of our ability to
Yeah.
prove
Yeah.
them or to I mean, if you ask the sky a question and then a bird flies over, I mean, you can take that as a sign if you want to, but is it, can you prove that? Can you really prove that that was an answer? Or that the katydid, you know, turns into this bird, right? I mean, that kind of transformation. Yeah, this is actually a maybe one of the, I mean, there are strong poems in this book, but this is one of the poems that as a whole I think is really kind of wonderful. And well and beautiful. I think there's a lot of beautiful, I mean, not just language, but the sentiment of it, or the searching sentiment. Is that a word? Can I make that up?
Yeah. No, I agree. This is one of my favorites too, besides the title poem. I mean, the line breaks are just, you know, perfect. Like toward the end, after where Alice was reading, bury me standing, bury me
Yeah.
3 times. I love that the very next thing is, no one really drops dead from seeing. You're a gaunt flitting shape in the mirror, you know. I'm like, because when we see, sometimes we do feel like we, you know, sometimes we stop. I said the line breaks are brilliant. And that's what I appreciate about the poems that are set up like this, is that I can appreciate it more. I think I just have a harder time with the broken down version, spaced out version stuff. But I love this poem and how she makes those line breaks work so well.
And you know that we didn't say anything about it, but in the opening line of that poem on page 27, the songs we know not to talk over, the main verb in that first sentence is wrestles.
Yeah.
Yeah. After a funeral, something wrestles from the wind. It doesn't wrestle with it. It wrestles from the wind. I like that.
Did anybody have a favorite in this book that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, several people have mentioned the title poem.
I like that one too.
Um, I'd have to reread the entirety of the poem, but I do remember lots of good things out of page 40, poet wrestling with her own aloneness in its time of need. Just the beginning of that I thought was illuminating. One day soon there will be no more science fiction. And then isn't there the echo of that a little bit later on page 77, poet wrestling with reverse string theory. What if we are the science fiction or the humors of dark energy? But going back to page 40, one day soon there will be no more science fiction. One day. Everything we imagine is real, though not. Everything is a storm gathering in the middle of nowhere. It just feels like I can't say, I don't worry about the state of imagination. There's a place where the periods come in places that you don't really expect them, right? I crisscross and wrestle my way toward overwhelmed airplane, and I worry about the states of our imaginations, which is to say, I'm trying and striving and hugging invisible turns. Yes, and she goes on from there, but then you got the vampire bunny hidden in her carry-on a little bit later.
Well, you know, I won't say that I loved this one, but I kept trying to go back to this
Yeah.
because I kept thinking it was a key. The three heads of the crown. 0, 16th letter, nothingness,
Mhm.
and chaos. And we would be reading from right to left.
Yeah, I'm not sure I knew what to do with that.
Well, I didn't either, but it kept intriguing me, and I kept thinking, if I understood this, I bet I could lick the book.
Right, yeah. Then on that next page in where section 3 begins, I kept wanting to tie that three heads of the crown into 1, 2, and 3
Yeah,
on the right-hand page.
Yeah,
uh-huh.
I do too.
I've thought about that, and then I thought, well, maybe these are just 3 different definitions for 0. And if there was code, we'd have 0s and 1s.
Right.
She does mention 0s and 1s in more than one poem, right?
She does,
Yeah.
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 And since y'all have taught me that the X can be I, then the eyes and the eyes of the hurricanes and that shape, is a 0 shape.
Hmm.
Like I said, I'm trying.
No easy answers for this book.
It's not. Nullification properties is possible transformation rather than destruction of the quantum, and the real worlds reveals itself, capital Y on that one, at the singularity of a black hole, does not abide by any law, changes the riddle. Poet's proposal on zero, responsible or on chaos, depending on how we take it, responsible for dark energy, vampire bunnies, and insomnia. Insatiable lover, enemy of mathematics and elegant equations. Creation's twin presents nullification properties as possible transformation. You know, I could really, that's, you know, that's almost Christian right there.
Mhm. Well, you know, on that next page, 30, on a 51, I'm sorry, 51, toward the bottom of the page, one of the lines that leapt out to me is, real is a disease. And in a book in which, you know, imagination figures and discovery and, you know, multiverses and string theory and, so maybe what we think of as real life or reality as we know it, is a disease. That's kind
Or
of fascinating.
disease.
Oh yeah, or disease. Yeah. I don't know. It's fascinating to contemplate what that might mean.
Well.
Hmm.
I try to keep us about an hour, so we're.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to say about this interesting book?
I like that she ends with "what if" on the last page, 96.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if you just take that kind of a little farther up, ever real is there, am next, and will we sing? Or perhaps you and I will until something greater than gives. Oh, what if? What if?
Well, I will say I'll reread this book and I'll reread it several times.
Mm.
And I'll probably be looking a lot of things up. I really didn't have time to do more than a first read.
Well,
And that's not enough with something like this.
no. Well, what was it? Faulkner was asked in an interview. You know, some readers have said that they've read your books 2 or 3 times and they don't understand them. You know, what would you recommend? And he said, read it a fourth. Something like that. Yeah.
So I do have a question for a college professor and an editor. If you receive poems like this, how do you approach them as an editor and as a professor?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I mean, I try not to necessarily impose something on. I always try to figure out, like, okay, what is this text trying to do and how can I help it? You know, if somebody turns in something to me, or even if I see something that's coming, I suppose you're talking about, I'm just one of the editors for the online journal One. And that's basically a yes or no vote. You know, occasionally we get into semi fisticuffs about something, but I think just as a teacher, when somebody submits something, I guess I'm kind of interested in figuring out what it is and what it's trying to be. It may not be it might not even be the kind of thing I would have written, but it's not. I'm not trying to get anybody to write something like me necessarily, or anybody else really. I mean, you use them as models, but you know, how can I help it become you know, as cliched and hallmark as it sounds, you know, how can I help it become its best self?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I just wondered, if, do you look for patterns when you get a poem? Say, oh, I mean, I think you could really, if you're just looking at one, but if you got several of these poems,
Mhm.
would you ask the student, why do you have this across the page like this? What is the purpose of, the double colons and the brackets and the period?
Yeah.
Would you ask the student that, or do you think that we should be able to get that?
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to asking somebody, because I'm also kind of the mindset you ought to be able to defend any choice that you have.
Sure.
But you're also talking to somebody or anybody at a particular moment on a continuum.
That's true.
And so, this may be a poet, that we're reading now, but, who knows, in another decade or so, a lot of this same type of thing may be at work in her poems, but maybe even more accomplished, so that we then go back and reread this and go, oh, wow, this was like the thing leading up to this
Right.
other. So, yeah, there's just there's so many ways to write poems. And that sense of variety, I think I think we're more likely as readers and as writers to fall into ruts and patterns and, doing something the same way. I know we kind of talked about Louise Glick's book earlier. And, she's someone who has kind of spoken about or written about how after every book, there's a kind of signing off, and then trying to find a new approach or a new way of writing a poem. And that someone could come along and say, well, I don't think she does. All her books are very, but as long as it's the delusion that allows the poet to write the kind of poem that they need to. I mean, y'all know I have a book coming out in a few months with my watermark phrases that are visually and vertically down the left-hand page of a book, or along the page. And these are like the earliest ones are 18 years old. But if somebody challenges me, well, it's a really odd looking thing on the page, but yeah, it's a whispered prayer behind the poem. And there's this, and it's me aligning my language along with, Frost saying I have promises to keep, or all these statements, practice losing farther, losing faster, that have mattered to me. Some from literature, some from the Bible, some from music. But it's a scaffold, or it's a prayer, a subliminal message behind my poem, and I'm aligning and realigning my own thinking through through this phrase, the central phrase of my life. That may not matter to anybody, and if someone would say, well, you could have realigned this whole poem and it would still be the same thing. Well, I couldn't have written it. I couldn't have written it any other way. This is what I needed in order to write the poem.
I think KB also, like in Rockvale Review, we've got, I read a lot of poems that are very unusual as far as appearance on a page. And for me, it has to come down, is there an entrance of something that moves me, or something that I can, grasp, or is it just complete chaotic craziness? And there are some of those poems that they're not going to go further, but we've published in Rockvale Review several poems that are doing unusual things, not quite as different as this book has, but some that have enough interesting language and that has enough heart connection that I want to, do something with those poems. And it's great if you could have a conversation with the poet. A lot of times, you know, you're gonna make your decision, you know, without that conversation. But I like things that are different and unique, as long as there is a point of connection.
Right.
And I think in this book, there's enough in the language, despite the periods and the symbols and the, you know, that there is connection.
Are y'all familiar with, I think it's a paraphrase of Carl Jung or something, but it's something I've used for years in my own teaching, and also I think in the way that I think about writing poems. But the idea is everything in a given space helps to determine the meaning of the space. And I mean, when I say that, I think, okay, you know, a poem is this space, but I don't hear when I say that, oh, it's a visual space. I mean, for some readers or some authors or poets, the page is it's kind of like a canvas. And so it's the arrangement of the words on the page are not just syntactical, not just, you know, subject, verb, direct object or whatever, but it's the parceling out of meaning, phrasally or imagistically or spatially. And that's what allows them to write the particular poem. But I mean, if you read, you know, go back and read early and late William Carlos Williams. You know, we think of Williams with certain kinds of poems, but, you know, a book length poem like Patterson, if we read that today, we would still think, okay, this is really unusual visually on the page sometimes. And then especially later poems where you kind of that triadic line stepping down, and, you know, a poem like To Asphodel That Greeny Flower, and you know, he's not always left justified on the page. And that's you know, approaching 100 years now, 70 years, 80 years for some of that stuff.
E. Cummings, you know.
Or E. Cummings, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we were talking, we mentioned him before, but, you know, Cummings, you know, visually on the pages does some kind of quirky things, but a fourth of all of his poems are actually sonnets. And sometimes it's like he takes a sonnet and explodes what it looks like, or what we might expect it to look like. And in that sense, he's using a received form, but he's robbing his reader of the crutch of the received form as the justification, or the you know, the appreciation. Oh, you knocked it out of the park. You did a sonnet here. Well, let me just rearrange it and make it look like something that's not a sonnet. And then somebody could say, well, I don't get this poem. Well, let me put it all back together. Oh, it's a sonnet. So what makes a good poem or not? Is it the form? Is it what it says? You know,
And knowing that he was playing with the new invention of the typewriter, though, and what it could do is something. So, you know, then you have to look, okay, so what is being played with here? Maybe.
All right. Next month, we're going to kind of go back to a more typical poetry book. Sylvia Wood's What We Take With Us. And that's going to be on February 22nd.
and that's Eastover Press. You know, we're part of what we're trying to do sometimes is to do books by smaller presses, or maybe even in this case, it's a very recently started press, but Eastover Press.
So is that the last? So are we changing this to the last Tuesday? Is that?
Yeah, kinda.
Okay, no, that's okay. I had it set up separately. Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
yeah. That was kind of my mess up for January, but it seems to be working.
That's all right.
Yeah, and I bet Sylvia will join us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Good.
February. So that should
Do
be,
we know what we're going to do for March yet?
well,
Ye-
I lost that list, but
I've got the list or at least some of the things we had written down.
you gotta change.
I mean,
them.
is it okay if I mention these,
Yeah.
Sandy?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. One of the books we were looking at is Christian Collier's The Gleaming of the Blade, but you said that is not quite out yet.
It's out.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Out, but I saw that in what I was looking at, that it was not available until June or something like that.
June.
But I need to relook at that. I could be just.
Yeah.
racing. Okay.
And then we were also looking at Marianne Worthington's The Girl Singer,
Uh-huh.
and then Danusha Lamaris, The Bonfire Opera.
Oh, yeah, that would be fun.
Of those 3, March, April, May. Then we're gonna take June off.
Yeah.
You got the.
Well,
rest.
do you want to do, all right, so we do Sylvia, and then do you want to do Marianne and give us time to
Yeah,
make sure Christians, okay. So we'll go to Sylvia Woods and then Marianne Worthington's The Girl Singer, and then Danusha Lamaris, The Bonfire Opera.
Okay, sounds good.
But yeah, we'll send this along to everybody.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
All
Thank
right.
you.
You.
Oh,
It's good to see you all.
good to see you. And this was an interesting one to start with. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Shake
we
up the
could go
year.
back to Bob Hickox. I
Oh, right.
enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that was your holiday assignment.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.